My name is Avery was 19 years old when my stepmother decided I no longer belonged in my own home. It was New Year's Day night during the countdown, not when people were laughing and kissing and making promises they would forget it happened. After the celebration ended, when the house was quiet, when witnesses were asleep, the house still smelled like champagne and burned candle wax. Empty glasses sat on the kitchen counter. Confetti was pressed into the carpet by shoes that had danced. Only hours early, everyone else was asleep. Everyone except Hirsch stood in the kitchen when I walked in, fully dressed, hair perfectly arranged, arms crossed like she had been waiting. That should have worn meth. And she spoke, "You stole my money." Her voice was calm, too calm for a moment. I didn't understand what she had. Sadie asked her to repeat it. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out an empty white envelope, holding it carefully between her fingers. $1,000, she said. "Cash, I keep it here and now it's gone." I looked at the envelope, then at Harry. "Didn't take anything." She tilted her head slightly, the way people do when they pretend to consider your answer. "You were the only one home yesterday afternoon," she said. "That doesn't mean you've always had access to my things," she interrupted. "And you've always had an attitude." That word had followed me for years. He looked toward my father's bedroom. The door was closed. I could hear his heavy breathing through the wall. He had drunk too much the night before. He always did on holidays. Would not wake up. "She knew that. You can call him," I said. "Ask him." She smiled faintly. "Not Kindle. There's no need to wake your father," she said. "This is between you and me, between us, as if it had ever been." Equally tried to explain. I told her I had worked a double shift. I told her I hadn't even been home. I told her she could check my bag, my pockets, my room. She waved her hand. "I'm not interested in excuses," she said. "I'm interested in protecting my homie." The words settled heavily in my chest. "He won't have a thief under my roof." Something inside me went very still. "You're accusing me without proof," I said. "Proof," she repeated. "I don't need proof when I have common sense." And she said, "Edie, you need to leave." At first, I thought she meant for the day or for a while. I was wrong. "Pack your things," she said. "You have 10 minutes. It's New Year's Day." I said, "Where am I supposed to go?" She shrugged. "It's not my problem." When I didn't move, she picked up her phone. "If you don't leave," she said, "I'll call the police and tell them you stole from my." Believed Harry had seen how easily she cried, how convincingly she played the victim. I knew no one would choose me, not over. Harry went to my room. It looked exactly the same. An unmade bed, a few books, clothes folded neatly. A life paused in the middle. I packed fast. A backpack, some clothes, my ID, my phone charger, the small amount of cash I had. Savetti didn't take anything. Sentimental sentient requires safety. When I walked back into the hallway, she was watching. Mesh looked at the bag, then at my face. "Good," she said. "I didn't think you'd make this difficult." He wanted to scream. He didn't. He walked to the door as my hand touched the handle. She spoke again, more thinly. "Turn it on. Embarrass us," she said. "If anyone asks, this was your show." I say nodded on. "See." Then I stepped outside. The air was cold and sharp. The street was quiet. Firework debris covered the ground like burned promises behind me. The door closed not loudly, firmly. Stood there with my backpack, my breath visible in the air. He didn't cry. What I felt was recognition, like something that had been waiting a long time had finally stopped pretending. Katie didn't know where I was going. The bus station lights were on, so I followed them. He sat on a metal bench and watched people pass, families, couples, friends, still drunk on celebration. One looked at meth. It was the first lesson. Invisibility begins the moment you stop. Bellone Gingy slept sitting up, my arms wrapped around my boggy. Woke when the sun rose. It was the first morning of the year, and I had nothingy thought about going back, about knocking, about waking my father. He knew how that would end. He would sigh. He would ask me to apologize. He always did so. I didn't go back. He stood up, adjusted the straps on my backpack, and walked forward. That day divided my life in two, for I was accused, and after I was free, the first week after I left my house did not feel real. It felt temporary, like something that would be corrected soon, like a mistake. Someone would notice. He waited for my phone to ring. It didn't. He checked it anyway every few minutes, as if staring at the screen might force it to carino messages. No missed calls. That was when reality began to settle, not violently, not all at once. Slowly, cold seeping through. Fabrici learned very quickly which places allowed people to stay without questions: bus stations, public libraries, hospital waiting rooms, places designed for movement and waiting. Not Bellone Gingy slept sitting up because lying down invited attention. He learned how to make myself small enough not to be noticed, small enough not to be asked to leave. Hunger came in waves. At first it was sharp, distracting, impossible to ignore. Later it became dull, manageable, like background noise. I drank water to trick my body. I chewed gum when I could afford it. I watched other people eat, not with envy, but with study. Noticed how much food was wasted, How easily abundance forgot itself in the fifth day. An old woman dropped her groceries outside a corner store and rolled into the street. Her hands shook as she tried to reach them. No one so petty. Dee gathered the cans, carried the bags, walked her 3 blocks home. She insisted I come in city. I hesitated. She smiled, a tired, gentle smile. Just some soup, she said. You look cold. He accepted. That was the first warm meal I had since leaving. She didn't ask questions, didn't ask my name. Didn't ask why a teenage girl was alone on New Year's week. She just talked about her late husband, about how quiet the apartment had become before I left. She pressed $20 into my hand. For your kindness, she Sadie tried to refuse. Ish closed my fingers around the bill. Kindness deserves kindness. That sentence stayed with me after that. I started looking for ways to help, not because I was generous, but because helping gave structure to my days. It gave me a reason to wake up. Carried boxes, helped clean garages, walked dogs, sat with people who didn't want to be alone. Sometimes I was paid, sometimes I was fed. Sometimes I was only thanked. I learned which form mattered most. At night I counted my money, not to dream but to measure time. Each dollar meant another day. I could exist without asking anyone for permission. He set rules for myself: never steal, never lie, unless survival demanded it. Never ask for sympathy has a cost. Some nights were harder, the cold pressed against my bones. The noise of strangers filled my head. He thought about my father, not with anger, but with clarity. Would have believed her or pretended to. Believing was easier than choosing. Weeks passed. He stopped thinking in terms of past and future. Morning, afternoon, night. Serval shrinks to me. Only afternoon. A man collapsed near the river walk. People stepped around him, careful not to get involved. He knelt beside him. He was breathing, but his eyes were empty, unfocused. He looked expensive but lost. He asked if he could hear me. He nodded slightly. Do you know your name? I asked. He shook his head. Oh, you know where you live? Another shake. Fear flickered across his face, raw and childlike. He called for help, stayed until paramedics arrived. They asked me questions. So did you know him? Are you related? He said. Noise stayed anyway at the hospital. They told me he had no identification, no phone, no memory. Amnesia. They asked if I knew anyone who could take responsibility. Looked at him, at the way his hands clenched. The blanchetti said I would stay until they found Somion. I didn't know Wibbit. Something about his confusion felt familiar. That night I slept in a chair beside his bed. He watched his chest rise and fall. He realized something quietly. Helping him did not feel like charity, felt like recognition. I didn't know then that my life was about to change direction. He only knew that for the first time since New Year's Day he was not alone. I stayed with him the night at the hospital. The paramedics had left. The nurses were gone. Only silence and the faint smell of antiseptic. Remenide couldn't remember anything. His eyes scanned the room as if searching for answers he had lost. I watched him closely, not out of pity, but because I understood what it felt like to have your world erased. We rented a small room above a closed bakery. The rent was low. The windows faced an alleyway, but it was Ursi helped him learn small things. Again, how to eat without spilling, how to walk without stumbling, how to sleep without fear. Looked at me like I was a lifeline, but I wasn't certain if he knew I existed. Didn't know his name or his past. I asked him what he wanted to be. Khaled Henry. He said after a long pause, it feels right. He nodded. Henry. It is days turned into weeks. We developed a rhythm. Morning coffee, small chores, walking to the market, preparing meals together. He remembered skills, but not people, not places, not how he had been before. I taught him what I knew, not by telling, but by showing, by letting him trust without expectation. On morning he found a notebook, a gift from the landlord. Blank Pajesh asked if he could write. I said yes. Wrote his thoughts, confused thoughts, fears and fragments of dreams, sketches of a life he could not remember. He didn't read, not yet. He learned to let him have his space, to not fill the silence with my own stories, to allow someone else to exist without interference. Shared simple meals, bread, soup, occasionally a small fish from the market. He taught him to notice details. A bird outside the window, the way sunlight hit the floor, the rhythm of footsteps in the alley. Laughed, sometimes quietly, like he was discovering something new for the first time. Months passed. I found work nearby, cleaning, carrying boxes, helping neighbors. I kept my routine because structure keeps you sane even when the world feels fractured. Henry helped where he could, folding clothes, sweeping floors, washing dishes. His hands clumsy but willing. One evening he asked a question, his voice low, eyes fixed on the floor. Why do you help? My paused. I didn't answer immediately because the truth felt dangerous. He said carefully, because it Feels right nodded. But he didn't fully understand, and I didn't correct him. He began to notice things, small things, expensive shoes, a gold watch peeking from his sleeve, clothing to find for someone homeless, a bearing to confident for someone lost. He asked him about it. He shook his head. I don't know, he said. I can't remember. He didn't push. Curiosity without pressure builds trust. So I waited, observed how petty, realized slowly he had not always been like this. Something had happened, something erased him, not just from memory, from everyone who knew him. He didn't know yet who he was, but I knew he mattered more than I could explain. He started remembering small things, how to read, how to operate a phone, how to use the ATM, but never his past, never his name, never the life he had before. I realized the truth was waiting for a moment when he was ready. And for a moment when I was ready. At night, I sat by the window watching the city lights, thinking about the woman who had thrown me out a year ago, thinking about the streets I had slept on, the strangers I had helped, the small acts of kindness that had kept me alive. I realized something. Quietly, I was learning how to survive, not just for me, but for someone else. Seen for the first time since being thrown out, I felt purpose. That purpose grew slowly, silently, like roots under frost. He didn't know it yet, but this man Henry would change everything, and he would reveal truths I could not have imagined. The mornings grew colder as winter deepened. The city lights glimmered faintly through frost on the window. Henry sat across from me at the small kitchen table, his eyes distant but searching, like he was trying to remember a song he had never learned. That he began asking questions, small questions at first. What is this street? What is that building? How do people know each other? He answered carefully. Not too much, not too little, letting him find pieces of himself. Slowly one evening he picked up a notebook I hadn't seen him touch before. He opened it, wrote words quickly, then paused and looked at me. He said, I think I remember Somathinji. Waited. My heart slowed its rhythm, but I kept my expression neutral. He swallowed. I can't explain, but I think I was important. I had money. I had people. I had influence. He nodded, not a reaction, just acknowledgement, because if I reacted too much, he might retreat. Memory can be fragile like glass and warm hands. Over the next weeks, fragments came back, not all at once, just sparks. A smile at a familiar melody, recognition of a street corner, a name that made him pause. I observed him closely, learning to trust someone who had lost everything once, and who was now finding pieces of power he could not yet fully wield. He asked about his past, more boldly, not out of arrogance, but necessity. It was part of him, part of his identity, part of what would decide our future. I answered with care. I told him what I knew, which was mostly what he had done since arriving here. I avoided anything that could hurt him, anything that could make him doubt himself. Again evening he confided something quietly. Avery, I feel like I am someone else, someone I should know but cannot fully grasp. He nodded. I understand, I said. You will remember everything soon enough, and when that happens, you will decide what you do with. I nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the floor, fingers tracing the edge of the table. He started noticing his clothes, the gold watch he wore, the subtle weight of responsibility in his posture. I asked if he wanted to go outside. He agreed. We walked through the city, his steps deliberate, careful, yet confident. He realized then he was remembering more than faces or places. He was remembering the essence of himself, his instincts, his power, his influence. And that realization made me both cautious and strategic. He understood I had a choice: stay quietly in the shadows, support him, be unnoticed, or prepare for what would come when the world knew who he was. Againi had survived being thrown out. I had learned to be invisible. I had learned to help, to observe, to endure. No, I had to decide whether to remain a helper or become someone who could step into the light and reclaim what had been taken from me. Oh, night, he remembered a name, not his, not mine, but a name that connected the past to the present. Very, he said quietly, I think I know who I was, and I think I know what I lost. He waited. I did not ask because waiting is sometimes the most powerful act. Dione watched him, saw the weight return to his shoulders, the confidence quietly returning, and knew the moment of reckoning was approaching. He had spent a year learning survival, learning patience, learning the quiet strength of observation. Oh, I had to apply it, not against strangers, not against fate, but against the person who had thrown me away and the truths that were about to be revealed. Henry began to speak more freely, his memory becoming more whole, hints of his life, glimpses of his wealth, moments of influence. and power that had once defined him. He listened, not with envy, not with fear, but with calculation. Understanding that his return to full memory would also be my opportunity had grown stronger, smarter, more patient, and I knew when the time came, I would no longer be the girl thrown out on New Year's Day, would be the woman who returned with truth, with power, and with the ability to face the person who had accused me without evidence. Winter was fading slowly. The city lights were softer now. Henry sat at the small table, his hands on the notebook he had filled with fragments of memory, his eyes clearer than ever before. I watched him carefully, quietly, like a hunter observing wind, direction. Before striking, he spoke without hesitation. Avery, I remember. Everything. She nodded. I had expected it, prepared for. I've told me about his life, about wealth, about influence, about decisions that had shaped hundreds of lives, about the accident that had erased him and the people who had taken advantage of his absence. He listened, not with awe, not with fear, but with calculation, because now the world had changed for both of us. Henry looked at me, and for the first time I saw recognition, not just of the person who had cared for him, but of the strength he had felt in me, the patience, the guidance, the quiet authority that had grown over the months. You have done more than help me, he said. You have kept me grounded. You have reminded me who I am. And I owe you everything. She didn't respond because words were unnecessary. Our understanding existed in silence. Over the following weeks, we planned carefully, not for revenge, not yet, but for clarity, for control, for the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. He told Henry about my stepmother, about the day she accused me, about the money, about being thrown out on New Year's Day. He listened not with disbelief, but with the quiet intensity of someone who now remembered power. He agreed. Justice would be measured not in anger, not in cruelty, but in truth and exposure. Felt a strange calm. I had imagined this day for months, every scenario, every conversation, every moment of confrontation, and now it was real. We returned to my childhood home, quietly, no dramatic entrance, no alarms, just the two of us walking the streets. I had walked alone a year before the door opened. My stepmother greeted me, her smile polite, fragile, a mask that could shatter at any second. Avery, she said, I didn't expect to see you. He didn't respond immediately. I observed measured preparation. Henry stood beside me, silent, but his presence spoke louder than words, a weight of authority, a reminder of truth about to be revealed. He began to speak slowly, evenly, without emotion. Everything I had rehearsed, everything I had prepared. He told them about the envelope, the missing money, her lies, her accusations, the fact that she had falsely accused me to protect herself. She faltered, her voice raised. She denied. She screamed, but the room was quiet. Her audience had changed. Henry stepped forward, his words calm, direct, precise. We have records, he said, bank statements, witnesses, evidence proving every word. Avery spoke. My father stood silent, shock visible on his face. The truth had a way of filling the room even before anyone acknowledged it. My stepmother tried to argue, to manipulate, to regain control. But the weight of evidence and the quiet authority of Henry crushed every lie. Watched her calmly. Because I had grown. Since that New Year's Day, since the cold air, since the hunger and the streets, since helping strangers and a man who had lost everything. She had grown into someone who no longer needed approval, who no longer feared lies, who no longer hid. And I knew, as she stumbled over words, that this was final. Henry turned to me, and for the first time I felt free. Not because she was defeated, but because I had reclaimed myself. We left the house together. Snow was falling gently. The street lights reflected softly on wet pavement. It was New Year's Day again, exactly 1 year. Terry breathed deeply, calmly. It was no longer the girl thrown out. I was the woman who had returned, and nothing could erase. The house felt different. This time the walls no longer belonged to her. The air no longer carried authority. Every step I took echoed with certainty. Henry followed silently beside me, a quiet force, a reminder that the truth was on our side. She noticed the change immediately. Her eyes flicked to Henry. Confusion, fear, disbelief. She had never seen him like this before. Never seen anyone stand with me so calmly, so powerfully. He let her speak first, words, spilling accusations, insults, attempts to twist the story back to her advantage. I watched her, measured, silent. Every word she uttered only made her guilt more visible. The lines on her face sharper, the smile trembling, the hands shaking. Henry stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He simply presented facts, evidence she could not argue against. Bank statements, video recordings, witness testimonies, every proof she had hidden or twisted for her own gain. Her composure broke. Her breathing became shallow. She realized she could no longer control the narrative. No one would believe her lies. Anna Marie spoke. Then calmly, evenly, without hesitation, I told her everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment she had attempted to erase me, every word she had said to make my father doubt. Mesh stammered. Her eyes wild. She tried to shout, but the room had already shifted. The power had moved away from her into my hands. He watched her unravel, step by step, carefully, as if the months of planning and patience had built this exact moment. Her threats were powerless. Her tears were meaningless. Her apologies too late. Henry remained quiet beside me, a silent pillar of strength, occasionally glancing at me. A small acknowledgement that he understood the depth of my endurance. I revealed my final truth. The envelope she had used to accuse me, the money she had stolen herself, the fact that she had lied to the police if necessary, everything I had endured for a year, the survival, the growth, the strength she had tried to destroy. She froze, her face pale. She realized fully for the first time that she had lost not just control, not just reputation, but the respect she thought she owed. My father stood silently, shock written across his face. He could no longer pretend. He could no longer protect her lies. The truth had arrived with force, with precision, with authority. He could not ignore. Henry turned to me quietly, his voice low but firm. This is your moment, he said. I nodded calmly because I had prepared for this. Every step, every word, every detail. He walked past her slowly, looking directly into her eyes, not with hatred, not with revenge, but with undeniable truth. This is what you created, she whispered. I don't answer, I said, because the words are irrelevant. The evidence speaks for itself. The room remained silent for a long time. I could feel her panic growing, her desperation, the realization that the girl she had dismissed, thrown out on a cold New Year's morning, had returned stronger, wiser, and untouchable. Henry placed a hand gently on my shoulder, a signal, a reminder that I no longer stood alone, that whatever she had done could not harm me. Anna Moorish slumped into a chair, defeated, broken, stripped of pretense. He turned to leave. No words necessary, no final insult, no shout, just the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming what was mine. Outside, the snow was falling gently. The streets were empty. The year had turned, and so had too. Walked away with Henry beside me, knowing fully that this was the true beginning, not the end, of a life rebuilt, a strength earned, and a justice delivered. The days after the confrontation were quiet. The house that had once held fear and lies was empty of her control. I returned only to collect memories, not to live there. Every room whispered the past, but I no longer felt its power over me. Henry, and I walked through the streets. His presence, calm but commanding. People recognized him now. Business associates, former employees, security teams. They treated him with respect, authority, as if he had never lost it. Ali watched him carefully, learning how to navigate a world that had almost forgotten him, and realizing that I had gained something equally important: power. Not money, not influence, but knowledge, control, and the ability to act without fear. We set up meetings, quietly correcting mistakes, ensuring those who had tried to take advantage of Henry's absence were accounted for. Every deal, every contract, every deception uncovered. I was the shadow guiding him, the one who had endured the year of being erased and now had a hand in rewriting reality. The old woman who had fed me soup, the people I had helped on the streets, they still existed in my memory. Small acts of kindness, reminders that strength is not only in power, but in compassion. I carried both now. In every choice I made, in every decision, I helped Henry implement me. Stepmother's presence was gone, removed legally and socially. Her lies exposed, her attempts to manipulate destroyed the world that had allowed her to control me. Now recognized her for what she was, and she had no recourse. Henry looked at me one evening, quietly, thoughtfully. You have changed, he said. More than I imagined. He nodded. I have learned to survive. I have learned to endure. I have learned to wait for the right moment. He reached out and for the first time acknowledged fully the person I had become. We started organizing the company, restoring projects, helping employees, repairing damage. Not for revenge, but for order, for fairness, for strength tempered with wisdom. He realized then that the true victory was not in confrontation, not in exposing lies, not in reclaiming what was stolen, but in creating a future where I and Henry could exist, where our decisions mattered and our presence could not be Araceti visited the streets where I had slept, the bus stations, the corners, remembering every small kindness, every gesture of survival, every lesson learned. I had not just endured, I had grown. I had built a foundation, a quiet empire of patience, of strength, of skill. I walked through my childhood neighborhood not as a runaway, not as a victim, but as someone who had returned and claimed her place in the world. Every step measured, every glance confident, every breath controled. Henry followed, not controlling, not dictating, but steady. A reminder that even power is best exercised with care. That night, we planned quietly the final steps, ensuring no loose ends, ensuring no remnants of the past could harm us. Our alliance was completescent but powerful, built on trust, built on patience, built on shared understanding of survival and strength. And I knew the final act was coming, not with chaos, not with shouting, but with precision and satisfaction. It was New Year's Day again, exactly 1 year after I had been thrown out. The streets were quiet, the snow falling softly, the city calm, but alive. I stood with Henry outside the house that had once been my prison, the same house that had tried to erase me, the same house that had tested every ounce of patience and endurance I had. Henry stood beside me, silent, steady, a reminder that power and truth were aligned. I did not need to speak. The moment carried its own weight. I opened the door. The house was eerily empty. She was gone, removed by evidence, by law, by exposure. Her lies scattered like brittle glass, unable to cut anyone. Anna Marie walked through the rooms, no hesitation, no fear, every memory neutralized by my presence. The air felt mine now, controlled. Me assurity remembered the snow outside, the cold air, the night I had stepped into nothingness, and I realized how far I had come. From fear to power, from invisibility to recognition, from silence to command. Henry whispered, "This is your victory." Not Monet nodded. It was mine entirely. Minu did not need confrontation. No dramatic speeches, no shouting. Truth had already acted, evidence had spoken, actions had revealed lies. The world had witnessed. I felt a strange calm, knowing that 1 year of endurance, 1 year of careful patience, had led to this exact moment. Perfection in timing, precision in execution. Outside, the city lights reflected on wet streets. People celebrated, oblivious to the small revolution that had taken place quietly. A girl thrown out on New Year's Day had returned stronger, wiser, and control. He looked at Henry, who now carried himself with full confidence, fully restored memory, fully restored authority. But he did not dominate. He guided, he corrected, he rebuilt with fairness and purpose. I realized then the true power was not revenge, not exposure, not humiliation. It was control over one's life, the ability to act with precision, to endure, to observe, to return when the world expected you to stay. Gonai had done all that and more. As the clock struck midnight, snow drifting through the streetlights, I felt the weight of the year lift from my shoulders, not because she had been defeated, but because I had grown, because I had survived, because I had built, because I had reclaimed myself. Henry smiled faintly, not arrogantly, not boastfully, but knowingly, and I knew we were ready for everything to come together. He breathed deeply, slowly, and stepped into the new year, not as a girl thrown out and powerless, but as a woman in full command of her life, her past, her choices, her future. And for the first time I felt complete.